Today we're interviewing David Vandegrift, the co-founder and CTO of 4 Degrees. It's a pleasure to be interviewing you today. My name is Raul Kaluru. I'm a freshman at St. Paul School and the vice president of CompanyRoots.
My name is Suresh Jasti. I'm a junior at Homedale High School and I'm the founder of CompanyRoots. Before we start the interview, we just want to thank you for taking your time. The first question that we always ask is, what were your company roots and how did it help you get into 4 Degrees?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be chatting today. So maybe it's helpful if I just give a little bit of my personal background, and I think that story might help kind of lead into the founding of 4 Degrees, if that sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool, fantastic. So I went to school at Georgia Tech, studied industrial engineering, and specialized in operations research, specifically optimization. It was very much kind of just sort of random. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in college. Certainly didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated. Didn't have a career in mind or anything like that. It all ended up coming full circle, but I'll get there. So in college, tried a whole bunch of different things. Nothing really stuck. So I ended up in consulting, which is a very standard post-graduation, don't know what I want to be when I grow up sort of path.
Yeah.
Did that for a few years, learned a whole lot, which was great. But ultimately did not enjoy what I was doing, didn't find it, fruitful, I guess, engaging on a deeper level. So I left McKinsey and founded my first startup, which was a company called MVP Innovation. I was in the retail space, enterprise software for retailers and for CPG companies. Didn't go that well. There was a lot I didn't know. And so while we were solving a problem that needed solving and we were building a pretty cool solution, we ultimately didn't know how to actually sell our product.
Yeah.
So it was pretty quick flare out. But at that point, I was convinced I did want to be in the tech industry because while my first experience hadn't gone that well, again, I'd kept learning a whole lot and I was enjoying myself much more.
Mm-hmm.
So from MVP, I ended up going into venture capital. So I moved from Atlanta to Chicago, joined Pritzker Group Venture Capital, and began investing into technology companies, and specifically focused on emerging technology,
right.
Particularly artificial intelligence, but a little bit of IoT, VR, AR, that sort of thing. Did that for a couple of years. And then that's where I met my co-founder, Ablorde, who started 4 Degrees with me. It's also where I really started delving into the artificial intelligence space. Mm-hmm. And so, like I mentioned, the college experience comes full circle. It turns out that the optimization work that I had been doing in college is the kernel of machine learning, which is now what a lot of people are excited about in the field of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so as I began delving into this field and learning what it was about, it turned out I already had a very solid underpinning of the technical expertise required to operate in this space, which was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So yeah, after a couple of years in investing, Ablorde and I left Pritzker Group and started 4 Degrees. So that was about a year and a half ago now.
Yeah. So you used to work at Pritzker Group Venture Capital along with Ablorde Ashipi. So what experience did you gain at Pritzker, and were there any influential people you met other than your co-founder there?
Sure, yeah. So I guess the biggest thing from a learning standpoint was just getting exposure to a whole lot of startups in the technical space, mm-hmm. and learning what went well, what didn't go well. So seeing over and over again what people were doing, how it was working, how it wasn't working. Like I mentioned, my first startup did not go well, and it was because of a lot of lack of experience, lack of knowledge. And so immediately going from that to a couple of years of intensive seeing, hundreds of other founders trying out different things was just a fantastic learning experience. Like I mentioned, that's where I began investing in the artificial intelligence space and kind of delving into it, which is now really kind of my bread and butter. It's my home field. And so great that I had the opportunity to really spend a whole bunch of time and energy on that. All of my coworkers there were fantastic. Venture capital is a high achievement field. Everybody's very ambitious, very capable, very knowledgeable. And so I'd say everyone was influential to one degree or another. And the Pritzker Group's now an investor in 4 Degrees. So we've stayed very close with them.
Yeah.
So what was the process like in developing the AI software for 4 Degrees?
Sure. So we are first and foremost an enterprise software company. The AI is kind of the how of you do that, but it's not really the point. That's not true of all AI companies. So there are companies like DeepMind, which was acquired by Google, which truly was just developing artificial intelligence for artificial intelligence sake. But at 4 Degrees, the real purpose is we're trying to help professionals form stronger professional relationships.
Right.
AI happens to be a really good way of doing that, but that's secondary too. We just need to create an overall good experience that helps professionals achieve those goals. So I would say the bulk of the time that we're doing is not all that different than what other enterprise software companies are doing. So building out the platform, you have all the infrastructure that sits under that, all the basic UI, UX functionality sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That being said, AI does play a critical role. So one of the things that we do that's a little bit unique in this space is we try and develop a better understanding of, based on your communication with people, how close are you really with them? How close do you want to be? And then make suggestions to kind of get you from where you are today to where you should be.
Yeah.
And so that process is all intelligence driven. There's a whole bunch of different models that go into it. One of the most basic is that we look at the metadata around your interaction history with a given person, plug that into a machine learning model called a random forest, and the random forest spits out essentially a cadence, which is based on past history. We estimate that you want to be talking with this person every 3 months.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of cool. I mean, it's basic and it doesn't do a lot without being stuck in the broader framework of thinking about the space. But that's the sort of thing that artificial intelligence can now do. Whereas before, you would have had to have relied on much simpler relationships. So rather than the random forest, you could do like a basic linear model saying, okay, if you talk a whole bunch, maybe you should keep talking a whole bunch going forward.
Yeah.
If you haven't talked, then maybe you don't want to keep talking going forward. And the nice thing about kind of less linear models or more advanced models is that they can say, sure, that's true up until a point, but actually, if you worked a whole bunch together on a project, then you would have been talking a lot. Now you're talking less. That's probably because the project's over. You don't actually want to keep talking to them. And so generally the models are intelligent enough to suss out that kind of nuance.
So how did you name 4 Degrees as it is? Like, is there any special meaning behind the company name?
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit of a play on the 6 degrees of separation, which, if you haven't heard of it, was this kind of research / movement sort of thing in the mid-1900s.
Yeah.
The idea was you were within 6 degrees of connection to anybody else in the world. And it was originally based on some research with the old postal service, where they would actually, give letters to 100 people and say, okay, your job is to get it to this person in rural Japan. And that's what they found is on average, it took kind of 6 relays before it got to that person.
Right.
The more modern research uses digital social networks like LinkedIn or Facebook. They found that the real number is about 3.7. And if you round that, it comes out to 4.
Wow. That's surprisingly small, actually.
It really is. I mean, the big part of the internet is helping people connect. And I think that network shrinks by the day.
Yeah.
Or rather, the distance in the network shrinks by the day.
Yeah. So 4 Degrees is participating in Techstars. How has that experience been, and how does it actually work?
Yeah, so we went through Techstars 2017. So we were actually very fortunate in that Techstars is essentially how we launched the company, which is pretty rare. Most companies have been operating for at least about a year before they go through the program. But like I said, we were very fortunate. So it was a 3-month intensive period from something like July through September. And it was full-time. So we were with a cohort of 9 other companies, 10 companies total. We were all in the same shared office space every day for 3 months. They put a little bit of structure behind it. So the first month was what they call Mentor Madness. And they basically just set up a whole bunch of meetings between us and various mentors from the community. So it could have been investors, technical experts, design experts, sales experts, basically just, the Chicago community of people who are really good at building startups.
Yeah.
And so did a whole bunch of meetings every day. That was the first month. The second month they call Growth Month, which is basically let's take all of this knowledge, expertise, connections that we formed in the first month, and then actually put them into practice, growing the company a little bit. And then the third month is all about preparing for fundraising. So you put together your material for your ultimate pitch or demo at the end of the program. You're forming a whole bunch of relationships with investors, trying to figure out, can I raise money? If I can raise money, how much can I raise? What are the terms? That sort of thing. So just getting a whole bunch of sophistication around that. So the original 3-month program, incredible, very, very fruitful. Made a whole bunch of connections that have really helped the company and a whole bunch of friends from our cohort. The new managing director of Techstars at the time was very generous. So we actually ended up continuing to work out of the Techstars space for a full year, not just the 3 months, which was great.
Wow.
And just a really strong network that we'll kind of always have going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So how competitive is the 4 degrees industry right now, and what are the requirements needed for success?
Sure. So like I mentioned, we're a software tool for professionals looking to manage and improve their professional relationships. We are trying to do some mixture of create our own space or reshape an existing one.
Mm-hmm.
So broadly, the kind of space of software you might consider us playing in is called CRM, it's customer relationship management. Salesforce is the biggest example in that.
Yeah.
What we're doing is a little bit different in intent from what most historical CRMs have done, because they've mostly been focused on tracking sales process, right? So I'm going to reach out to 1,000 people over the course of this month and then track them as I kind of progress them through a sales funnel. Because we're not focused on sales, the intent and therefore the actual implementation looks a little bit different. From the outside in, ends up looking somewhat similar, but the nuances are pretty important there. And so, for instance, we don't have a funnel that we're trying to usher your relationships through. More what we're focused on is long-term authentic relationships. And sometimes they are their own kind of end or purpose, right? So you really just want to strengthen these relationships. And of course, those are tied to real world value, depending on what type of professional you are.
Yeah.
But it's far less transactional than sales tends to be. So we play in the CRM space. Obviously, there's a lot of implementations of things like Salesforce or Salesforce IQ or Affinity or HubSpot or any number of other systems. For the most part, our customers are using those for that more transactional funnel kind of process. And what we're trying to do is convince them, actually, you should be using a system for something a little bit different, that where people are doing it today, they tend to be using more spreadsheets, right? So they have the Excel of all of the people they've been talking to, when the last time they talked to them, what the notes are. And that's typically what we end up actually replacing. And so I think the challenge we face is less direct competition typically, and it's a little bit more like competition for mind share, because we're asking people to do not a new thing, because they're already doing it today, but doing what they've been doing historically in a slightly different way that's going to pay more dividends for them. And so that's our uphill battle, is educating people on why you should be bringing in this new type of system to do something that you've never really had a system to do before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what makes you different from something like LinkedIn? Like, I know it's more of like a platform of connecting with people in the first place, and yours is a little bit more talking. But do you think that you could add a depth to LinkedIn that they don't have?
So LinkedIn's a social network. So by nature, they're trying to increase connectivity between the different nodes on the platform, which are the users. Mm-hmm. Up until now, 4 Degrees has actually been entirely what we call single player mode. So there's no connectivity between our users. Everybody is on the 4 Degrees platform. They have their own ecosystem within 4 Degrees, but none of that connects to any of the other users. So what we're trying to do is help people manage their own information better. We're not trying to have this kind of public platform for commenting and poking and congratulating people on jobs across the 4 Degrees network, whereas LinkedIn, really their mission, right, what they're trying to drive is, how do we get people to engage more with LinkedIn, post more things on LinkedIn? We actually encourage most of our users' engagements to happen off of the 4 Degrees platform.
Correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what would a day-to-day look like at 4 Degrees normally?
Yeah, it's super variable. So right now it's a team of 6. So myself, Ablorde, and then 4 people that we brought on to work with us. Mm-hmm. All 4 of those people so far have been on the product team. And so you'll find in the team room on a given day, most of the work is going to be product oriented. Yeah. So how do we make this a better product that solves more problems for people and does so in a kind of more convenient way? And so, yeah, I mean, most of the activity is going to be focused around product. So folks come in relatively late because it's the tech industry. So we get started 9:30, 10. Yeah. And then everyone's there kind of plugging away on their computers. From the outside looking in, it looks like a flurry of very silent activity. Nobody's moving a lot. Nobody's talking a lot. But obviously we're an early stage startup, lots of collaboration. So what communication does happen is very ad hoc. We try and keep meetings to a minimum just because we are so small and we can just talk to each other right across the open table there. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, so Ablorde is the only one kind of out doing active sales with customers right now. Mm-hmm. That being said, we encourage everybody within the company to spend lots of time with customers to understand how they're using the product, what their needs are. So, you know, people are kind of taking breaks, leaving the team room to go do all of that. yeah, I guess that's it. Anything more specific you'd like to know about that?
Well, so where do you work in like a combined workspace as well?
Yeah, we're in a co-working space. It's WeWork, which is the biggest one. And it's the WeWork on 125 South Clark here in Chicago. So they've got 4 floors of people working out of various offices. Ours has about 10 desks in it, so still relatively small because that's all we need right now. But yeah, it's a broader office of co-working space.
Yeah. And then also, what do you look for when you get people on the team for 4 degrees?
Yeah, it depends a lot on what we're hiring for. I guess the shared attributes across everybody. First and foremost, they just have to be excited and willing to come along with us in the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
So working for an early stage startup is just very different in almost every way than working at a very large company.
Yeah.
And we found that's probably the biggest weed out factor in our recruiting process and ultimately hiring is a lot of people don't understand what that entails. When they do understand it, they just realize it's not for them.
Yeah.
Other attributes that they all share, we're a very mission and values oriented company. And so from the very first conversation with all of our candidates, we talk about our mission, which is essentially to increase connectivity and close the network gap, as well as our values. So we have 5 values, we go through all of them, and then we actually ask people kind of to react against them and just talk through them in a little bit more detail. So I think that's a slightly different spin on the recruiting process than most people where the values tend to be more of a formality if they even come up.
Yeah.
And then after that, it all ends up being very specific to the role. So the attributes you look for in an engineer are very different than the attributes in a designer or in a salesperson. So that all ends up being a little bit more one-off.
Yeah.
So what was your childhood like, and is there anyone who influenced you to the stage where you are now?
Yeah, I had a relatively happy childhood, upper middle class for the most part. My parents were divorced, so my mom, for the most part, raised us. We saw her dad, regularly, but we didn't actually live with them most of the time. 2 older brothers, pretty good. I mean, my mom was very interested, I guess even determined to make sure that we were going to be successful. So I went to math, science, and technology magnet school for high school, which was a bit of a different experience. Ended up at Georgia Tech in industrial engineering. It's the best industrial engineering program in the world. Very fortunate that it was right there in Atlanta where so yeah, fairly privileged childhood, didn't really want for all that much, and had all of the resources that could make sure I was going to be successful. I was very nerdy growing up, so spent lots of time on my computer, playing games, but eventually kind of evolving into contributing to the technical world as well. Learned to program early on in high school. So yeah, it was definitely all of the things I needed to be successful in everything that I'm doing now.
Yeah. So aside from 4 degrees, you seem to be very interested in writing as you have your own personal blog and a Medium page. Could you explain to us where you got your passion for writing and where it sparked from?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any one particular place. I read a lot. I've always read a lot. So I started reading, full-length novels in elementary school. And actually just 2 days ago, I finished my 500th book on Goodreads. I read, I think, 46 books last year. Wow. So it's something I spend a lot of time doing and I enjoy doing. It's where I get energy from, as well as kind of enrichment and edification. Let's see, the actual writing, it's always been something that I've dabbled with. So, like reading early on, elementary school, middle school, high school, kind of experimented with doing my own fiction writing, and it didn't go all that far. In high school, I did a little bit of paid technical writing on a contract basis. So that was probably my first foray into doing it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I don't know, I started journaling at some point after college. Started writing blog posts a little bit after college. Did a little bit of writing actually it was Policy Mike at the time. Now it's Mike. They did a lot of user-generated content. And I don't know, just kind of went from there and found more opportunities for it. So I guess I find writing to be slightly cathartic, but also, I'm the kind of person that if I see a need in the world, then I feel kind of a responsibility or an urge to fill that need. And so if I find out some knowledge, for instance, I've kind of come up with what I consider to be a decent conceptual framework for understanding the field of artificial intelligence. And I've really struggled to find that sort of thing out in the open. So I'll go write about that and try and put it out there.
Yeah.
So we always end the interview off on the same question. What specific strategies would you give to the next generation of entrepreneurs and leaders looking to succeed in high school and beyond?
Sure. So I guess the biggest thing is to learn as much as possible. So I've kind of tied some elements of my different upbringing, like being nerdy in programming in high school, or the machine learning or the optimization that I learned in college, or going into consulting and learning about, like, none of this has been intentional, and yet it's been such a kind of wide, diverse, rich set of experiences that I've been able to pull all together into a single, like, okay, I can actually tackle this problem with a variety of perspectives that I wouldn't if I had had this very straight linear path. And so I think that's my best advice to particularly young people thinking about the field of entrepreneurialism is just go get as much different experience as possible. You know, I think entrepreneurship by nature, like, you shouldn't go find that job where you're going to get a pension and stay there for 20 years. I haven't stayed anywhere longer than 3 years, and I just kind of hop around and keep gaining experience, knowledge, and capabilities.
Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing us to interview you today. It was a pleasure to speak to you and learn about your experiences.
Absolutely. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, thank you.